Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. So today I always say I'm excited, but today I'm really excited to have Sophia Dawson from Holistic Psychology. And Sophia lives just up the road from me in Peas and Mornings in Central Otago. And we've been meaning to connect for probably about a year, if not more. So as a quick background, Sophia combines, from my understanding, nutrition and psychology. And I bet there's a lot more to it. So I'm going to let Sophia introduce herself. Sophia, tell us a bit about you.
Amazing, Amy. Thank you so much. And so amazing to connect. I'm so happy we're finally here. My name's Sophia Dawson. I'm a senior psychologist and founder of Holistic Psychology. So it's an online teletherapy service that supports individuals of all ages. I've got a fantastic team behind me, which is so cool. And so I am doing my PhD in nutritional psychology. So really sort of the study of how food impacts our mental health and specifically looking at OCD, and whether a dietary intervention can improve symptoms of OCD, which is really exciting. So I've just been, deep in the literature learning about all sorts of things, mind, body, the connections,
Yeah.
gut, brain, how all of our systems are connected, it's been pretty amazing. So it's definitely a specialist area for me, for sure. Um, yeah, I absolutely love it. I honestly can't get enough of this topic.
And I'm so excited to have you on here because it has been a hot minute since I was at university. And I feel like everything that we've studied is going to really intersect really well. To give you a little bit of background, at university, I studied human geography and the geographies of health. So yeah, we especially got into the epidemiology of obesity. So how obesity was spreading throughout society based on our environment and our consumption spaces. So I spent a really long time studying the psychology of consumption spaces. So when people go to restaurants and to bars and how the environment that we're surrounded by impacts our health, our nutrition, our obesity in a world where it's massively growing. And you will know this, but obesity and issues like anxiety and depression very closely linked to sort of
Mhm.
metabolic issues from what I understand. And even what I'm really excited to pick your brains on today, things like OCD, they're even talking now, unless I'm mistaken, you will know better than me, things about how symptoms of being on the autism spectrum are expressed and ADHD. I've
Mhm.
heard quite a lot about that. So I don't know how deep you go into that, but OCD sounds really interesting as well, because I think people think they get a diagnosis and it can't be changed, right?
Yes, that's so true. Or because I mean, at the moment, the gold standard for a lot of, I guess, how we treat mental health is either psychological therapy or like psychopharmacology, essentially. And sometimes, like, look, these things, of course, like I'm a psychologist, so I really do believe that therapy can improve people's symptoms. And I also
Definitely.
understand that it can be inaccessible for a lot of people as well. It's expensive. There's lots of long wait lists. There's lots of reasons why people can't get access to the therapy that they need. And then some people don't find benefit from medications that they're given for their mental health, and it just feels like we want to be looking at some other things, right? And this is one of the, I guess, factors that makes me really passionate about looking into this, particularly for OCD, because it feels like OCD has kind of been left out of a lot of the literature, like anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, all of these things at the moment in the nutritional psychology literature is coming out, and OCD has just been kind of missed. And I think
Mm.
because I've had years in practice now where I've worked with so many people who have OCD, and I've seen how debilitating it is, and also how I guess people really misunderstand it as well. You hear OCD and you think, oh, like hand washing or um, having everything in order and being a bit of a perfectionist kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it presents so differently for different people. You know, we can have relationship OCD or pedophilia OCD, or there's all sorts that I think people don't understand how much it can get in the way for people, right? So, I mean, if you can't access therapy, and perhaps if you don't want medication or you're not finding benefit in medication, it would be so amazing if there was another pathway that is accessible, like through our food, you know?
Yeah, and actually so interested in this because you didn't know this about me because I didn't know you were this deep into OCD. Not myself, but my my ex-boyfriend in Auckland. It was a relatively short relationship, but I think you'd agree that OCD exists on a spectrum
Totally, yeah.
to like completely debilitating versus what can seem like normal behavior to a lot of people,
Yes.
but actually can impact your daily life and your relationships. So I'm talking about myself being told that I couldn't step on a step because it needed repainting. I couldn't brush past a wall with my handbag. If I chopped broccoli in the kitchen and it fell on the floor, it was like up in a second. It was
Yeah.
like, it was a very, it was, I was on tenterhooks the whole time. It's really interesting. And even just going out. So I was very independent cookie coming straight from London. And I was like, woohoo, I'm going on a girls' night out. And he's like, where are you going? What are you doing? You
Uh,
need to be safe. This is
yeah.
someone I'd lived, 27 years before I'd met this man. All of a sudden, it was just completely crippling. It was
Mm,
really interesting. And I'm sharing this story, which is quite a private story, but from a perspective of I wish that he knew more about it and how potentially debilitating it might have been being for him.
totally. But I
Mm.
think I mean, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so important to put stories out like this because also, I mean, the literature tells us it can take up to 17 years for people with OCD to get diagnosed because, well, firstly, there's a lot of misdiagnosis. You raised it a little bit before, I guess, how a lot of psychopathologies can cross over, anxiety, OCD, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD
People
kind of.
use it so colloquially as well, don't they?
Oh,
Oh, I'm a bit OCD about that.
oh my gosh,
It's
yeah,
like,
this is
no.
horrific. I know, and this is, oh my goodness, if could be one thing that could stop in the world, that I think that would be so important because, uh, yeah, it just feels like people really misunderstand what OCD is, and that's really horrific for people suffering with it and enduring it and everything that it encompasses because a lot of the time we can only see what's kind of on the outside, which might look like kind of behaviors that might look a little bit odd or repetitive, or they might ask for reassurance a lot, and there's just so much going on underneath. It can be, as you were saying, so debilitating. And again, this is why, like, one big reason why it can be up to 17 years before people get support is because they feel there's such a stigma around the intrusive thoughts that they're having. Because if the content, for example, is sexual and linked with children, for example, I mean, it would be frightening to think that somebody could see that as potentially threatening and harmful for one to be around kids, right? Whereas there's a really big difference between, for example, being a pedophile, and I've, worked in prison and I've worked myself with pedophiles,
Yeah.
versus having OCD and the pedophilia type of OCD, and so I can only
So
imagine how scary
interesting.
it is to disclose those thoughts to someone
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that is completely new to me.
about like this type of OCD.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose the one of the key features of OCD is that the intrusive thoughts are what is called ego dystonic. So it means that when an intrusive thought pops in, it is like, whoa, like that doesn't feel aligned with who I am at all, you know. So like if you
Okay.
had a thought about, sorry, we're just on this topic now, about sexually offending against a child, and it's distressing, and you're like, oh my goodness, I do not want this thought. What does this mean about me? Um, One would be looking more down the avenue of OCD. because it's ego dystonic, it's creating distress, and then often there would be
So
compulsions after that to minimize the anxiety around the thought.
yeah, and so for people who just listening in to make the big words smaller, so
Yes.
ego and dystonic, disassociated with your ego, it's like the opposite of what you would
Yes.
want. What yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's like you have this thought and it's like, whoa, this is not me at all. Like I don't want that. That creates distress in me.
And you
Um,
have to do something else to fix it.
yeah, it's like then one does a compulsion. So that's a behavior often to just minimize the anxiety around the thought, or it makes one feel a bit safer and like less likely that a bad thing is going to happen. So for people with pedophilia OCD, for example, it might be staying away from children, like not driving past playgrounds or primary schools, etc. And then their world gets really small and it
Like not
kind of,
wanting to go anywhere near them. So even like
yeah,
friends with kids or whatever.
yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, one's world gets smaller and that's only, I mean, that's a really big part of why OCD is so debilitating because it just kind of puts one into this tiny small world that feels safe and yeah,
Mm.
I can honestly only imagine how horrific it feels. I've seen it again for years, and this is what made me feel so passionate about helping this group of people, you know, hopefully like looking into research that can help
Yeah.
this group of
And
people.
so can I just want to kind of lift it back up from the niche of
Yes,
pedophilia OCD, which I think is
yes,
so interesting.
yes,
But my friends, and a lot of this podcast is for like girls our age, right? So the audience is probably 25 to 50 plus.
yes,
Mostly women, often mothers, wanting to lose
yeah,
weight and feel better about themselves.
yeah,
But a couple of my friends have been really open with me about intrusive thoughts, which none of us got until we had a child.
yes,
And so I think intrusive thoughts are fascinating because it is a protection mechanism, right? That's why they happen.
definitely.
So bizarre things like your baby running out in front of a car,
Oh yeah,
like just horrible things like that, or like walking around every time I get the iron out. I'm
yeah,
terrified I'm going to drop it on his head somehow. It's like completely irrational. So
yeah,
those sorts of things. But like, I think there's so much to it, not normal, but like when you have an intrusive thought, most people are like, that was odd. There's obviously your body being like, don't let this happen. And you
yeah,
can push it away. Whereas I think it is quite debilitating, depending on, yeah, your
definitely.
psychology.
Well, I mean, you're completely right. Intrusive thoughts are really normal, and all of us get them. I mean, just to put it super simply, all of us can probably relate to like leaving the house, getting in the car, and being like, did I turn my hair straightener off? Did I turn the oven off?
Mm.
Like these sorts of things. And so, I mean, intrusive thoughts can actually, yeah, be helpful and protect us. But I suppose the difference between your intrusive thoughts, for example, and somebody who has a diagnosis of OCD would be the meaning that somebody makes out of those intrusive thoughts. Like,
Mm.
you know, you have the thought of, oh my gosh, I don't want to drop the iron on his head. And then it's just like the thought kind of comes and goes. That's a really kind of normal nature. But if it
Yeah.
sort of like hangs around and then you make meaning of it, like, oh my gosh, I'm this horrific mother that just like is going to hurt my son. And then that starts to, you know, create a lot of distress, really get in the way of your life. That's how one sort of, I guess, distinguishes between like the typical intrusive thoughts versus the intrusive thoughts that maybe have more of an obsessive compulsive kind of nature, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Really interesting. And so at what stage are you at with your research, Sophia?
Oh, so I'm in the middle of the research trial at the moment. So we've got, I think, about 14 participants that are at various stages in the trial. So what we're looking at is, I guess, because there's nothing out there at the moment, like of what people with OCD are eating. Like there's just nothing of whether a diet could even help people with OCD. There's a lot of research that speaks to the fact it is biologically plausible, you know, like just to think about factors like inflammation and oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction and insulin resistance and all of these things that you were talking about metabolic health earlier, metabolic dysfunction, these sorts of factors are implicated in OCD. And all of these factors, as you definitely know, can be impacted and improved by food. And so this is why, I've looked at the research and kind of thought, wow, this is certainly biologically plausible. And so that's really informed what we're doing. So yeah, we're in the middle of recruitment at the moment. We've got 2 different dietary interventions. I can't go into too much detail, but essentially it's like they're both whole foods,
Yeah.
processed foods essentially. And the second one in particular kind of focuses more on metabolic health. So I'm
Interesting.
so excited to be able to, support these people through, and I can't wait to look at the data at the end of all of this because it's sadly far too early to be pulling any conclusions. And so it just makes me really hopeful that we can find something that will help these people who have OCD.
Yeah, absolutely. So after that deep dive, that was just
Yeah,
meant to be the starter, but here we are.
yeah, very niche, very deep, very quickly.
No, but I love it. So based on what you're studying and how you want people to, how you want to help people with OCD, your knowledge beyond that is obviously quite broad. That's brought you to this niche.
Yes.
And I think what I'm kind of quite keen to run through is what I call my lifestyle design secrets, which is how people can change how they feel, how they look, how they feel, and how they perform, right?
Yeah.
So cognitively, mentally, everything. And so they are mindset first and foremost. So actually actively kind of managing your mindset, which I'm sure you'll know lots about. Environment design,
Yes.
which I noticed you shared something relatively recently about 50% of the supermarkets in New Zealand being ultra processed food. So not just processed, but ultra
Yeah, there's
processed
a
food.
lot out there. There is a lot
Yeah.
out there. I read something, I read something the other day that 60, if you're like a typical human in the world, your diet is 60% ultra processed food.
Yeah, it's a stat from the UK from Chris
Yes.
Van Tulleken, a doctor.
Yes.
70% in the UK.
70% in the UK. Oh my goodness me.
70% of the supermarket.
Wow.
And I think it's, if I'm quoting this wrong, apologies. I'll go and find the statistic to put it in the show notes. But I'm pretty sure it's 70%, and in particular, teenagers. So he was looking at teenagers,
Yeah.
which is a really, really emotional, vulnerable state. Like your hormones are changing. You don't know what's happening. You don't know where you belong in the world yet.
Yeah.
And you're living off this ultra processed food that through a number of mechanisms, like you say, inflammation, the gut-brain connection, could be causing you to misunderstand that world even more.
Mm. Totally right. Absolutely. I mean, it's quite scary looking at ultra processed foods generally, right? Like I honestly, just with my PhD research, it's something that I've had to dive into and had to get a really good understanding of myself because honestly, up until, probably the last 6 months, I wasn't really that clear on what exactly was classed as ultra processed. But even things like my mum bought these like canned soda waters, the ones that just have like lemon and lime or like different flavors. And I looked at the back and I think it was citric acid. And I was like, Mum, these are ultra processed. Just things like that you think, oh, it's just somebody squeezed lemon into this sparkling water, in a can. Naturally, of course you would. Of course anybody would see the label and think that that's true because they're being labeled as like natural flavors. And so
I was about to say natural flavors.
yeah, and so any like normal human is looking at that and being like, amazing, that's just lemon and lime or whatever. But it's just our bodies have not evolved to be able to process the stuff. And it's been so fascinating learning about the impact, on the gut as well, from having these things like emulsifiers that is absolutely, they're everywhere. They're this ultra processed component, of course, but that like they mix things that don't typically mix, right? So like oil and water. So, like
Mm.
buy peanut butter and there's like
It
oil
brings
sitting
them
on the
together.
top. Yeah, so that would mean emulsifiers probably aren't in there, but if it's all like mixed nicely, it probably has emulsifiers in it. But the impact of that on the gut is huge.
And I want to get back to that, but you know what's freaking me out? Because I eat pretty well. I'm pretty mindful of my diet and things. But diet, lifestyle, whatever I put in my mouth, basically.
Yeah.
But Charlie, little Charlie, he's 10 months old, trying to start him on solids. Obviously, the squishier the better, right? So you tend to there's lots of the pouches and things like that out there. But what I struggle with in New Zealand, and you've lived in London, so I don't know if you noticed this difference.
Yeah.
Our food is bad here. Like it's bad. And I'm not saying this as a Brit. I'm half Kiwi.
Yeah.
But I really struggled moving over here because in London you can buy bacon. You can buy bacon that's just bacon with some salt.
Mm.
Here, the bacon has a minimum of about 8 ingredients.
Wow.
And it's not terrible, but it's not brilliant either. And the one thing that gets me, I think the Greek yogurt here,
Yeah.
terrible,
Oh my God.
not normal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. You're like,
things
what?
like cottage cheese. So Charlie loves cottage cheese. Can I find one without bloody emulsifier or thickener in it?
Wow.
Absolutely not. So even these whole foods that I do advocate for
Mm.
come with a caveat that it's really interesting when you actually label read. Mm.
Well, this is it. And I think this is because I mean, once I've learned to label read, going into the supermarket is like a very easy experience. Like I think
Yeah.
New Zealand is just, we are behind, like in terms of you're going to London and just having a look at all the things that are available. And I suppose because it's so close to Europe and there's lots of amazing things that kind of come in and out between these amazing countries, and we're just this tiny country at the end of the world here. Um,
It's
like
quite
I
a good
think
thing, I reckon,
yeah,
but yeah.
totally, totally. But I mean, I've certainly learned, and as you're speaking to there, it's like, I mean, label reading is just so important, and I think it helps us feel empowered to be able to go into the supermarket and have a look at what we're putting in our mouths and know, yeah, like what is going to nourish our body versus what is kind of going to detract. Because if something is nourishing your body, it's also nourishing your brain, so I mean, physical health is mental health and vice versa, right? So,
Yes,
so
which I
important.
can't wait to get into more. But so
Yeah.
on this, while we're on the topic of environment design, we go to the same supermarket because I'm pretty sure I saw you there once and I was like,
Yes.
I don't know if it's her or not.
Yes.
And I
Oh,
had a brand new little baby and I was like, oh,
oh my gosh, I'm probably in my own world, just
yeah,
my ingredient reading. Yes. Yes.
exactly. But so love going to the supermarket, but and like you say, I find it extremely easy now for myself.
Hmm.
When I think too broadly about the rest of the world and the clients I work with, I do find myself getting quite triggered by things like the cereal aisle.
Yes. Yeah.
Bread. So the cereal aisle is pretty terrible. So it says low GI, 25% less sugar, lowers your cholesterol, whole grains
Mm.
on this ultra processed food.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are the kind of foods that people who are trying to be healthy, probably some of your patients, are consuming,
Mm.
thinking that they're helping their body.
Yeah.
Like, when do we stop the madness? Like,
Well, it's that I know that this is what's really hard, hey, because I think, I mean, I'm learning in my PhD research because a big part of the research is about educating people to label read. And
mm,
like what I'm noticing in the people coming through is that the things that they think they're putting, well, the things that they are putting into their body, they believe that they are less processed just because of the health claims that are made as you're speaking to
mm,
all these products. And I've learned like the more that we can educate, other people and ourselves, that honestly, the easier it becomes just to kind of spot some of these things.
mm.
Because I mean, I certainly find it now so much easier to kind of nip in, nip out, know the brands that I'm buying that, like, tick, 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 they fulfill the kind of Whole Foods thing. But it's so important to be looking at, as you say, for these, like, not, I guess, being dragged away by the health claims that are being made on the product, to be able to turn it around and know what you're looking for in the ingredients list. It's
Yeah.
so important. It's just so easy to see something at face value and kind of trust what it's saying, right? Like it's
Yeah,
so,
definitely. And so you mentioned emulsifiers
yes,
and the gut and what they're doing to the gut.
yes.
What do emulsifiers do to the gut? Are you able to explain it a little bit to people? And what else do you look out for on the back of them?
Yeah, sure. Well, hey, I've got probably quite a basic understanding of emulsifiers, but my understanding is, like, particularly in people with gut issues like IBS, and I know that that's sort of more a symptom rather than a diagnosis, but
I was about to say, so a lot of people don't realize that, though, Sophia. So IBS, a symptom of stress and possibly how other things in your body.
yes.
And again, IBS is one thing. They're like, I've got IBS, like it's a diagnosis and like they have
Yeah,
to live with it. And
yes.
it's not. Yeah, IBS is like you say, a symptom.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
So people with like any, I guess, kind of gastrointestinal discomfort will be impacted. From my limited knowledge, worse than maybe people that don't have gut dysfunction of any kind. But for all of us, it's loosening the tight junctions kind of in our gut, so it can make our gut more leaky and, I believe, more inflamed as well. And so it means that the, like, food particles and things can sort of travel into our bloodstream, which can activate our immune system, and inflammation is created, and there's sort of this whole cascade of events that can happen from there. So uh, I guess what I'm learning, again, kind of on this whole journey of whole foods and ultra processed foods, and it's supporting people with this, is to help people be able to label it, but also tune into their bodies, of, like, when you have something that has emulsifiers in it, for example, like, what do you notice? Like, just listen to your body. How do you feel? What's happening? Even with your mental health, like, are you noticing anxiety increase? Are you noticing your mood decrease? Things like this. So again, it's just about empowering. And, like, there's actually so many amazing things out there. Like, speaking of supermarkets at the moment, that can help us, like, foster amazing nourishment of our bodies. We just have to know how to find it, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's amazing that you brought that up. And the sort of leaky gut and things that can trigger it and make it worse, right? So our guts leak, all guts leak. If they didn't leak, we wouldn't absorb any nutrients from our
Yeah,
food, right? So
yeah.
it's when they get a little bit too leaky and the holes get a little bit bigger. I'm not describing this scientifically, by the way.
Oh, you're
And
completely right there.
like Sophia said, these, you know, particles enter our body, possibly in places they shouldn't, and trigger an immune reaction, which
Mm,
is the cause of a lot of autoimmune issues, which is another thing that people go, I have this issue.
yeah.
That's generally an autoimmune disease is generally a symptom of something else that's triggered it. So
Mm,
understanding that, I think, is really important. And it's not the end of the world and it's not the end of your life and you're not going to have it for the forevermore. It
yeah.
is a lot, most of them are actually reversible generally through what you eat. But Sophia touches on a really amazing point that actually what you put in your gut really affects your psychology. So if
Yes.
you eat something and you find yourself feeling a bit anxious or feeling a bit fidgety or like just not that happy,
Yeah.
if you get pain in your gut, like noticing those sorts of feelings.
Mm.
And the lady that I spoke to recently, Laura from Low Carb Haven.
Oh, awesome.
So Laura suffered with a lot of autoimmune diseases when she was younger, to the
Yeah.
point of almost going blind. It's quite extreme.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, and so that led her to some low carb lifestyle.
Wow.
So, as part of going low carb, she obviously cut out a lot of the processed crap and
Yeah.
she felt a hell of a lot better. And we were talking about the fact that now on Low Carb Haven, a lot of the foods are treat foods, which she knows. And
Mm.
late last year, she fell into the trap of, yeah, I'll eat a 12 or 15 ingredient protein bar, quite a few emulsifiers, which she wasn't afraid to admit. She knew there were lots of ingredients in there. And recently, she's gone back to gluten-free, dairy free, maybe having one bar or so in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And she's like, the puffiness is just gone. She's like,
Wow.
because she's obviously an inflammatory girly, she described it as, she can tell the difference even between like a processed health food
Yeah.
and eating whole foods.
Wow. Gosh, that's pretty
Yeah,
amazing, hey. And there's like a bidirectional relationship between these things too. So it's not just that I suppose like food can make us feel rubbish, but like when we feel rubbish, we also are more likely to reach for the rubbish, you know?
definitely. Well, if we're tired,
Yes.
I love this statistic that if we shift from something like 8 hours sleep to 6 hours sleep, we eat 20% more calories the next day because we're just gagging for the energy. Yeah,
Unbelievable, isn't it? And like, I mean, you think about that and you think we're probably also reaching for the more convenient things, right? Like it's not just me taking time to, cook up some organic eggs and whatever. It's gonna be the convenient
we
stuff.
feel on the back foot. We feel like we need something quickly. We feel like we deserve a treat.
Yeah.
And that brings me on to more likely to choose a food that's going to trigger our dopamine and make us happy,
Yeah, totally.
which is
Well,
generally sweet or sugar laden.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, from a psychological perspective, I kind of consider this like in a different but similar way of thinking about how, like, I guess every choice we make. And did you know we make 35,000 choices a day as humans? Isn't it
Okay.
wild?
Yes, I had a really good one. Like it was a similar number, but
Yeah.
in the food decisions that we have to make. So
Mm,
every time we drive past a cafe that says coffee with a free muffin, or like $3 milkshakes on Tuesday, like all these messages that are subliminally everywhere, we have to actively ignore them.
yes. Well,
So
yeah,
like you say,
exactly.
35,000. Oh,
Exactly. And then, because I mean, I also think about it in the supermarkets, like you go into the supermarket, there's thousands of things you could buy. And so you're
yeah.
actively thinking, am I buying this? Am I buying that? Am I not buying this? Am I not buying that? Going to the gym, what machine am I going to use? What weights am I going to lift? There's just choices everywhere. And
Yeah.
so every choice we make either takes us kind of towards the person we want to be, towards the life we want to have. And I guess, for our perspective on what we're talking about right now, like towards nourishing our body and giving ourselves those amazing sort of foundations, or the choices will take us away from all of those things. And often when we make what I would call away moves, so the behaviors we make or the choices we make that take us away from that, they feel really good in the short term. And, they're like, it's the thing, you eat something delicious, and hey, all of us do it. We're human. Like, we need to. It's part of
Mm.
being human. It's not, I know that that's totally not what you advocate as well. It's like, let's live a balanced life.
No, but it's monkey brain, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
totally. But it's being able to, in these moments when we are making food choices, to kind of be able to step back and go, what would my future self think of this decision? And it could be the future you tonight, or it could be future you next week, or in a month, or in a year. But like, what would that version of you be saying, essentially? And sometimes we are hanging out with our friends that we haven't seen in ages, and we're going to this beautiful restaurant, or like we're making a beautiful platter, or whatever. And that in those moments, it's just about, hey, like prioritizing social connection and fun and spontaneity and things. But other times, like, the food choices and the choices we're just making generally day to day, being able to kind of connect with that future version of us that could, I don't know, travel back in time and give us some advice, because then it puts our decisions in perspective, doesn't it? It's like, I, I
Hmm.
I'm making a choice now that's going to impact me later. And I think that's what a lot of humans understandably have a lot of trouble with.
Absolutely. And I think I can't believe how well we're aligned on that because I'm pretty sure you just regurgitated an entire article from my website that I wrote a while ago.
Yeah.
So the way I always try and work on it with clients, so it's almost like you guessed the third lifestyle design secret, which is habits. So
Amazing.
I always say that every single decision you make every day adds up to the person you want to be or the
Mm,
person you want to move further away from. So we look at where you are today and where you want to be and
yeah.
how we get you there.
Yes. Yes.
It's really, really interesting. And I think a huge thing, I think it's a problem with society, right? Food messaging, all sorts of marketing.
Yeah.
You're on Instagram too. The amount of, not really in my algorithm, but my friends send me some funny things like 7-minute abs
Yeah.
or like get abs in a week. It's all like quick, 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 now, now, now.
Mm,
And the whole of life, and actually, I reckon having a lean, healthy body and good psychology is all one giant marshmallow experiment, right?
uh-huh.
In so for anyone who doesn't know the marshmallow experiment, you probably know it a lot better than me. But the kids put in the room and they get they get told they're allowed one marshmallow now or two marshmallows if they can wait for how long is it?
Um,
Not very long.
it's not long.
It's not,
Yeah,
they're very
I've
small
seen
children.
it,
So I think it's something
but
like 3 minutes or
it
five
is.
minutes.
Yeah, I think
But
it's yeah.
I think, yeah, it's so interesting. But in life, as adults, we've
Mm,
forgotten the marshmallow trick, right?
yeah.
So if we can choose the chocolate bar now, or we can choose a steak now, which will make us feel probably twice as better in a few hours, or tomorrow, or the next day. But a
Yeah.
lot of those decisions come with short-term pain, right?
Yes.
So they come with resisting something, or they come with going out to buy ingredients to cook a home cooked meal.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a real tug of war.
It's so true. And I mean, this is one of my amazing PhD supervisors. They're both incredible humans. So one of them, Professor Grant Schofield, he speaks about that being like that we choose our heart. Like you choose,
Yes.
essentially you're choosing like hard now or hard later, you know, and that can look, I guess, like lots of different things. Like, let's say that eating aligned with a certain dietary pattern, like, okay, we're saying whole foods right now, right? That you want to eat a whole foods diet. Like, when you're in the moment and you've had a really hard day and you just want to reach for the chocolate bar, like, that's a kind of hard where it's like, I'm actively kind of putting stuff into my body that my body's not going to love, so that's
Hmm.
hard in one perspective. And then eating a whole foods diet and sticking to it is a hard in a whole different way, but it's kind of like one hard is short term and one hard is like longer term benefit, so we're
Definitely.
actively choosing our hard in every choice that we're making.
In every day. And I think um mm, yeah, what's hard now makes life later easier.
Yes.
It's how I always try and explain it. And I think it's important not to always live for your future self. I think I'm sure I saw a reel of you like on holiday and eating the pizza in Italy and
Yeah,
etc. etc. etc.
yes.
But you don't eat like that all the time. And I
No.
think the point is, yes, to enjoy those moments of indulgence, but
Yes.
I think it's also important to come back to, are you coming at it from a place of positivity? Are
Yeah.
you like, I am in Italy and I am loving this pizza? You don't have to be in Italy, but you might be with friends on a Friday night enjoying a beautiful wine and platter, like you say. Or
Yeah.
are you coming at it from a place of anxiety and almost like a scarcity mindset? Like, I'm stressed. I'm not going to get another chance to eat. I'm going to
Yeah.
shove this down. That's also got a lot to do with it, I think. And so hard now, hard later. I keep talking to people about now. We all want to look good, right? We want to look good on the beach or feel good every day, just for our own psychology, but trying to think about the long term too. So rather than exercising to look good at the pub on Friday or the beach in 4 weeks' time, trying to think about exercising and eating for my old lady body. That's what I like to call it.
Love
So
that.
you want to have children as well at one stage. So yeah, if you have children, I want to be able to play with my grandkids in like 30, 40 years time. I do not want to be the grandma that's struggling to get off the sofa. And
Absolutely.
that's what it comes to. So if you start to even broaden your long-term thinking in that regard, it makes it quite a lot psychologically more enjoyable. Think about the short term, think about the midterm, and think about the long term. It reduces the pressure.
Absolutely.
I
And it's also
think.
about reframing, hey, because so one of my good friends and colleagues, Emma Wiley, who's a nutritionist, and I were actually collabing to kind of make a food relationships course at the moment. And like one thing
Oh,
that we're
exciting.
yeah, so like the nutrition sort of psychology lenses coming together on this. And one thing that we've said is like food is for to nourish, not to punish. And I think it's
Yes.
so important, like to think about where the values and the goals are coming from. Do you know what I mean? Like, because yeah, you're saying it's kind of like somebody saying, "Oh, I want to eat a whole foods diet because I want to lose 5 kilos," for example, versus I want to lose 5 kilos because it matters to me to nourish my body and be the best version of myself and be able to run around with my grandkids. Like it's kind of about reframing from like a fear mindset to almost like a love mindset, I suppose, just to put it really simply.
Yeah,
Not trying to
absolutely.
punish and say that, I'm not good enough, so I need to be doing this, but rather like I actually love and value myself so much. This is why I'm doing this, you know?
You've without knowing it, Sophia has just delved into the feed and exercise psychology portion of my body reset program. For
Wow.
anyone listening who
Yes.
hasn't been there before, it's basically, yeah, just I used to exercise to make myself skinny. I used to exercise to burn calories as a quote punishment, not a punishment, but I was like, if I run now,
Yeah.
I can drink all those vodka oranges and eat all that chocolate later.
Oh, yeah.
That sort of mentality.
Yes.
Yeah. So the kind of chronic cardio followed by lots of whole grain carbs, which was not a recipe for looking or feeling good. I can tell everyone that now. But instead, flipping the narrative to nourishing your body, making yourself feel good.
Yes.
But it's still a misconception like that the focus on making yourself smaller.
Yes.
It's really interesting. And I think a lot of people don't understand that building muscle and fueling your brain actually will make you feel so much better that you naturally trigger your, like, sort of fix your hunger and satiety hormones in a way that makes you not want to overeat and
Yeah.
overindulge. Whereas when you come from a place of punishment,
Mm.
not quite the same. You know who is most worst at this? My husband.
Oh,
I'm completely throwing
being
him under
called
the
out.
bus. Yeah. So in our friends are moving to Bali next month for about 5 months, and we're going to see them on the way back from Europe in a few
Oh,
months' time.
yeah.
And Scott and his best mate are having like um a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
So his friend's just been diagnosed with sleep apnea. So
Oh,
he wants to lose weight to get rid of that and be able to sleep better.
wow.
Um, and so, but they just want to have like a beach body challenge. Typical lads, typical
Yeah.
Kiwi lads. And Scott just said to me, I just want to get smaller. I just want to get smaller. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, hun. I was like, it's about like, you want to like recomposition, you want to build muscle and you want to, but oh, so many people just run and
Yeah.
diet really hard
Yes.
and then hate it and stop.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that's it. It's not sustainable, right? Like it
No.
feels like it's something that, when you've got a goal, you start to do things that in the short term, it's just like, it's like an all or nothing kind of mindset. But it's just not sustainable. We want to think about kind of like the values beneath that, what is actually important to me about doing this thing. So, and like, how can I do it in a way that means I can keep it going for longer? Like just
Yeah.
gradually move towards this because I think that's our minds can be really critical and harsh towards us, on that front, right? Like I have
Yeah.
to do everything now perfectly, all or nothing. But yeah, as you well know, it's not sustainable. Um, but it's just fascinating how it can all be, yeah, it's influenced by like what we see everywhere, what we hear from people, our friends and
Yeah.
things that matter to us and all of that.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And it's so fun having this like deep psychological discussion because even my poor husband who lives with me just thinks I'm a bit nuts, to be honest. So it's all this underlying psychology basically that
Yeah.
underpins everything in my program, everything that you do, and everything that I think is important to looking and feeling good. I'm going to pull us back to hard now, hard later, because the next lifestyle design secret is movement.
No.
And I read it was on your Instagram study that I was obsessed with too,
Yeah.
about the fact that movement and exercise has been shown to be as effective as antidepressants.
Yes. It's pretty fascinating stuff, hey? It's
Mm.
amazing what is accessible to all of us. Like any of us can at any moment kind of decide I can move my body in a way that I love, walking, yoga, Pilates, dancing, swimming, whatever it might be. I mean, I totally know the study you're referring to, and I mean, just to sort of hypothesize why it could be, I think exercise has some powerful or anti-inflammatory benefits, right? You'll know a lot more about this than I do. And some suggest that like some antidepressants, and this is totally not my specialty area, the antidepressant side, but that they can have an anti-inflammatory element to them. And so I guess that's why food as well can be supportive in terms of mental health, because that can have an anti-inflammatory benefit too. So, I mean, I think when we move our bodies, it brings so many amazing things to us, right? Even just knowing that we've moved our bodies in a way that matters to us and, maybe moving us again towards that future self that is like, yes, I'm so glad that I did that. There's positive psychological benefits just that come from that, knowing that it's like I did something for my future self.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, isn't it? And I mean, from a mood perspective, it pulls us out of, the urge to isolate. Instead, it encourages us to kind of connect with something that matters to us and know that we're doing something for ourselves rather than, isolating away, which is really understandable. It comes along with the mood side of things.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned isolation because I'm quite keen to come back to that. But yeah, I think movement on so many levels. There's a company, well, it's actually an infrared sauna company called Dose, but they talk about it's very similar to exercise. And when we exercise, our bodies get warm from the inside out, right? So it's
Yes.
that dose stands for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's all our happy hormones all together. But
Yes.
it's definitely exercise is definitely something hard now,
Yeah.
easy later.
Yes.
And
Definitely.
you have to often, it might feel hard in the moment, or you might not feel like you've got the energy, but then actually after you've exercised, you have so much more energy. But
Yes.
it's having that foresight and it's doing it repetitively enough, which is when the habits come in that your body knows. So I wake up tired. I'm a little baby who doesn't like to sleep
Yeah.
sometimes, but it's having that foresight of knowing that I might feel a bit sluggish,
Yeah.
but if I get up and if I do a workout, I'm going to feel on top of the world. So it's
Yeah.
that post-workout feeling or post-walk feeling after you've
Yeah.
looked at the hills, cleared your mind,
Yeah.
stuck in a podcast,
Yeah.
or just listened to the sounds of nature, how good you feel afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what gets you through.
Totally right. Totally right. I mean, I think, you're speaking to all of the amazing things. We're so aligned, so connected. Just,
I knew this chat would be good.
having just like the solid foundation of like great nutrition, great movement, great social connection, and great sleep. Like, I mean, from a mental health perspective, and of course, from your end, the physical health perspective, these things are just so important. And I mean, just that study around sort of antidepressants and movement, it's just fascinating to kind of think if somebody was taking antidepressants, maybe in the absence of having this foundation sorted, for want of a better
Yeah.
word, like consuming ultra processed food for most of the day, like getting really poor sleep, isolating from people that matter to them, and not moving their bodies. It would be really hard, I think, personally, just to notice an improvement. So, like, if again, we were talking about
Mm.
curiosity earlier, with emulsifiers and the foods that we eat. I mean, imagine being curious about what happens to your mood if you are noticing feeling lower, just by prioritizing sleep, prioritizing the foods that you're putting into your body, and that they come from a nourishing, perspective.
Yeah.
moving your body in a way that matters to you. I mean, I think a lot of people hear the word exercise and they think, oh man, I need to go to like a HIIT class, or I need to go for this like 10K run. And I totally used to be one of those people too. But I've so learned now, for me, the movement I love is walking and yoga and Pilates, and you've just got to tune into that, right? And again, prioritize the connections with people that matter to you, because when we experience low mood and depression, we do pull away from people, and then we can start to feel like we're the only people that are experiencing this lowness. And when we connect with others, we find, oh my goodness, actually people share some of my thoughts and feelings, or actually people are here for me and they want to help and they're curious about what's going on for me. And that on its own is a pretty powerful experience, isn't it? So, I mean, to be prioritizing these things, and hey, I'm certainly not speaking out against like taking antidepressants or anything, but I'm just curious about if we can do these things even in addition to taking them. You've got to do what's right for you. But if you have this foundation sorted, I'm just curious to know what people find.
Yeah. And I should have asked you more of your background, but the reason I suppose got to doing this and where I am today is this is all the information that I wish I had known.
Yes.
When I was a teenager, I was
Yes.
put on the pill at the age of 15 for acne.
Oh no.
So I was put on the pill,
Yeah.
a pill that's now banned and illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that caused a relatively severe depression for about 3 years, but I didn't know what it was. So
Wow.
I just thought I hated my life and I
Yeah.
cried every day. I
Oh,
couldn't lose weight, probably because I was so full of estrogen. My
yeah.
boobs were enormous.
Oh,
What else? The food I was eating. So
yeah.
this was all a complete beautiful clusterfuck at the same time as the Special K diet and
What,
Kate
like the
Moss.
cereal? No.
Skinny, yes.
Oh,
Did you hear about that diet? Did it happen
now
here?
you've said that, I've seen it, but I don't know. I mean, is it literally?
It's Special K,
Oh,
dry grains for breakfast and lunch every day. No protein, no fat.
wow.
Yeah, and then eat whatever you want for the rest of the day or for dinner, etc. So, oh, all that sort of stuff, which of course, especially as a teenager, I was like quite an active teenager. You fall off the wagon because you're starving. You eat chocolate, you eat croissants, you eat four
Yeah.
pieces of toast when you get home from school, and then giant bowls of pasta.
Yeah.
Like, but I wish I'd known back then
Yeah.
how all of this stuff impacts your psychology. Even
Yes.
just knowing that going for a walk might have made me feel better. Do
Yeah.
you know what it's very
Totally.
interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, I guess, why we're doing a podcast like this, right? Is so that we can kind of spread this messaging to people that, because I think it's empowering, right? That there's things just like in our control that we can do now. And it's not about doing all of it at the same time, but like, is there one thing I can try today, for my sleep or for my eating or for my movement or whatever? Just to move them in that direction. I mean, I'm the same as you. I wish I knew what I know now 15 years ago, at least, when you're sort of in the thick of that, like McDonald's eating, like convenience food stage as
Yeah.
a teenager.
Do you reckon you felt like food and how you live affecting your mental health?
Definitely. I mean, it's so interesting because I feel like how I got onto this journey really, or had my mind open. I mean, firstly, I've got a lot of amazing family that are totally in this space that I've had kind of modeled to me over the years, which is incredible, because when you have people in your circle and my friends and things like, huge people that are like huge parts of my life that live to this, and I've observed that's been a really big factor. But one of them suggested to me reading Clean Gut by Alejandro Junger. And this is just a book I talk about. I reference to my sort of like, it was like the catalyst,
Need to look it
for
up.
me. Yeah, you
Yeah.
do. So good. Because I was definitely experiencing some chronic health stuff. And I read this book, and he was kind of making connections between what we eat and how you can heal physical illnesses, right? Like autoimmune disease, like you were talking about earlier, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
I remember being like, wow, I did not realize that food could be so powerful. And I removed a lot of inflammatory things, for example, from my diet. And just because it improved my chronic health issues, being mainly gastrointestinal, I just felt better. Like I felt like I could show up better and engage more in the world. Because, when you've got some kind of chronic health thing going on, it makes you feel like a bit hopeless, and it is debilitating, and it's like central to your world. And so when that can be improved, I mean, it's that whole mind body thing. You just feel like I can show up better. I'm the better version of myself. And so I've totally noticed improvement in terms of what I eat and how I show up. And, in the same vein, when I eat something that I know my body does not love and I feel rubbish. But hey, sometimes it's worth it, in the name
Yeah.
of like flexibility and freedom and things. And I know what I'm signing myself up for. Um, yeah, I mean, I've seen it have a massive impact on me, massive impact on people around me. It's kind of hard to imagine that food would not have such a significant impact when it's literally fueling us every day, right? Like, I mean,
But
it's just,
Sophia, we're the weirdos.
I
Like
know,
people
I
do not
know,
know this, and that's
I
why
do,
the supermarket and things trigger
I
me
do,
so much because
I do.
yeah, I feel sad for people.
It's really hard. I mean, I we were talking just before you came on, right, about Chelsea. You mentioned Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, which is so crazy because I worked just adjacent to Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London. There's incredible kids on an inpatient unit in Chelsea and Westminster, or Chelsea, and I remember opening the fridge, like in terms of the food that they were eating every day. I think I've still got that photo. It was years ago now, but I've still got that photo because I thought, how is this going to make these kids heal?
You might have to send it to me if you still got it so we
I know,
can add
I
it
will
to this
find it. I will
podcast.
find it. I'll find it because it was just like all the artificial colors, and everything was like bright green or bright orange.
Let
And
me guess, was it like a thing of like Sunny D and then
oh
maybe
my
like
gosh,
a
Sonny.
jelly
Yes, 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 totally. And like
sandwich?
cheeses and Coke and like, all of these things. And I do remember thinking, oh, like what would happen? And I remember encouraging these kids to follow this Deliciously Ella, who you'll be familiar with, I imagine.
Of course,
Well,
yes, great. She's great.
this recipe of hers, and I remember thinking, wow, this is so random. But just I guess focusing on whole foods and showing people how actually, brownies, for example, or like cookies and these kinds of things, like we can make them from whole foods. It's not like we're saying just like throw out all the yum stuff, but it's about like, how can we replace, I guess, the ultra processed stuff with whole food stuff. And I mean, hey, you can get it from your supermarket. You can get these ingredients from the supermarket and you can make it in a whole foods way yourself. And yes, it is more admin, but yes, your future self will thank you for it. Like imagine what that would do to these kids, for example, and everybody else out there who themselves is navigating, whether it's like chronic physical health issues or mental health issues. Yeah, just imagine how we could show up differently.
We could be vastly different. And
Yes.
this is triggering me now because little Charlie is at daycare, 10 months old.
Oh,
Yeah, and they are great. They are so good. But
yeah,
the other day, I picked him up and they were like, he's been so good at eating today. I was like, oh, cool. Like, what's he had?
yeah.
A jam sammy, waffles,
Yes.
brownie. Jam, Sammy, waffles, and brownie all in one day for a 10-month-old. I was like, oh,
And you're like, what have I agreed to?
yes, but they follow the like healthy eating guidelines and they don't use any animal fat. It's
Oh,
really, I think there's a huge systemic problem in things like schools and hospitals. That's probably a combination for a conversation for another day. But
definitely. But that's why, I mean, bless Charlie, he's 10 months old. But I mean, this is why like being able to tune into one's body is important. Like never mind the health guidelines, right? Like never mind what they are saying. Like imagine if he could chat, and say how he felt after eating that. And I mean,
or he'd be like, yum yum, now I'll crawl it off. So I'm sure he's not having too
yeah,
much of an issue. But
that's fine.
there's a kid at daycare with like chronic eczema, and there are, you
Oh,
know, children that I know are already getting diagnosed with
oh,
some of these neurodivergencies that now, people like yourself have read the research on
Yes.
how the symptoms of those can actually be really, really well managed
Yes.
through different dietary interventions.
Yes.
So we are getting close to an hour, Sophia. So if it's okay, I want to
Yes.
the last lifestyle design secret is nutrition, which of course we've been talking about a lot. But
Yes.
so without divulging which dietary styles that you're using in your experiment,
Yes.
which ones have you seen most predominantly in the literature helping with people's psychology?
Great question. So definitely the Mediterranean diet. So just for people listening, I suppose that's a diet very full of like meats like fish and chicken and like green leafy veggies, nuts and seeds,
Yeah.
olive oil, this
Olive
kind
oil.
of stuff. Yeah,
Mm.
amazing. So there's a lot of that in the literature. The ketogenic diet is starting to come through for sure. And then diets that are being found to be unhelpful for our mental health, the Western diet. I suppose we've been sort of touching on that today, but
Yeah.
essentially it's a diet full of ultra processed foods. I have not been able to find any literature that suggests that this is beneficial or helpful in any way. It is just flat out detrimental. So, I mean, if we can focus, I guess, on because of what the Mediterranean diet really is a whole foods diet, and you can do the ketogenic diet in a way that is also whole foods based, because sometimes with keto, there are ultra processed foods that can fall within it.
Oh, you're completely right. I've actually, just to share something, we're at the end of a summer body reset this week, and
Yeah.
I've tasked all the ladies to track their food and
Wow.
they're not so much their calories, but their macronutrients just to see what they're eating. And
Yeah.
it's actually really interesting because I would never describe myself as doing a ketogenic diet because a lot of people are like, ew, no.
Yes.
There's visions of like salami and cheese.
Yes.
But I've actually realized that, yeah, I am sort of under 50 grams of carbs, which is close to like not
Yeah.
quite a medically ketogenic diet, but it's very, very low. And I'm
Yes.
very active. And I've done a lot of research at your trigger book, Clean Gut. Mine was one by Mark Sisson, who was a triathlete.
Yeah.
And it's called the Primal Blueprint. So he talked about rather than doing chronic cardio and eating lots and lots of grains, which in big amounts can be quite inflammatory,
Yeah.
bringing that back to things like the Mediterranean diet, right? So like meat, fish, veggies,
Yeah.
simple stuff. And so yeah, it's really interesting. And I think a lot of people will go, oh, a keto diet, that's really unhealthy. That's not sustainable. And I'm like, I've probably been eating one for about 11 years. But
Wow.
it's not a keto diet. I eat fruit. It's not what most people think it has to be, but I don't eat the 70%, processed grains that a lot of the
Yes.
world do. And I think that's where my program started was most people eat 45 teaspoons a day, sugar equivalent in carbohydrates, but they
Wow.
think they're healthy because they're often in things like wheat bix, rice
Oh,
cakes, sushi, sandwiches. But
yes.
when you stack all those ingredients up over the end of the day, you get to about 100 ingredients from
Wow.
various things like just whole grain bread, but actually it's got 16 ingredients, emulsifiers, all these things.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting. So it's like high carb without meaning to be
Yes.
and inflammatory. It's so interesting. Like you say, no, the Western diet can go away. We'll
Yeah,
just
yeah,
put
totally.
that in the bin, please.
Totally, totally. And hey, I mean, like, I love what you're saying there that people might on the surface be like, oh, like, yuck, I'm definitely not doing that, or that will be too hard, or something. But again, just be curious. Like, what happens even when you reduce the amount of carbs, or you reduce the amount of ultra processed foods, or you increase like leafy greens or something? It's just, it's about
Increasing protein is the biggest
increasing
thing.
protein. Totally. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that's for sure. The literature absolutely supports that too.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah, it just, I mean, it's the building blocks of like all the important stuff that happens in our body, isn't it? And also it improves like, the feeling of fullness and again, it sort of stops us therefore from reaching for the convenience foods, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like I feel like our minds are really good at being like, well, if I'm gonna do the keto diet, I'm gonna do it, but why can't we just like bring principles of different things like gradually and slowly and tune into our bodies and see how it sits?
Yeah, absolutely. One question I have for you,
Yes.
before we move on to, we do a takeaway dessert on this podcast. So I'm going to get you to give us some takeaways for people to feel better. And I'd also love to know what's next for you. Again, I've just been looking at what you've been doing recently, and I know there's a little bit course to do with anxiety. I've just seen a
Yes.
few things like that. But
Yeah.
have you done much research into the carnivore diet?
Oh, no. But I know a lot
So
of people who have
interesting.
done it. Yes.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I've
What do they
not
reckon?
I mean, from what I know, and again, this is not my specialty, but I mean, I know it reduces inflammation, right?
Yeah.
People notice um feeling clearer, like in terms of brain fog, I
Hmm.
suppose. I mean, initially, I think you go through a bit of a slump, right? Like when you're kind of pulling carbs out of your diet and your body's kind of adapting to eating in a different
Same thing with everything.
and
Yeah, yeah,
totally with everything. But I think, yeah, just generally having more energy, feeling better, sleeping better, these sorts of things. And again, it's totally anecdotal, just like people in my life that have tried it. I mean, I'm kind of curious. My mind's getting in the way, being like, could I? Could I stick to a carnivore diet for an extended period of time? And I'm not taking my own advice here, but I do sometimes, like, I do carnivore meals, like, just like when my mind is doing this thing and I'm
definitely.
curious about it.
Yeah.
I'll do like eggs and the Bostock sausages, which I love because they're just chicken and tarragon and herbs and
Really
spices.
good. I love those sausages. Yeah.
So good. So yeah, that sort of thing. But what do you do it? Do you suggest it? Like what do you find?
It's like, it's hilarious because I keep joking about it being like my dirty little secret. But I tell you what, I have been semi-carnivore for like maybe the best part of a year now because when you're pregnant, right, your digestion, progesterone slows down your digestion.
Yeah.
Eating lots and lots of fibrous veggies is not the most comfortable thing to do all the time. It's really interesting. And then so after that, um, so postpartum, you're quite strapped for time. Your cortisol levels are like this with a baby crying. You're like, so the stress on your gut, you can kind of feel it because everything's new, right? Everything's new, everything's different. So I found it a really enjoyable way to eat
Yeah.
rather than trying to think about really elaborate meals. And so many people think that you have to be really, really um, you need a 16 ingredient smoothie bowl and a protein shake to lose body fat.
Yes.
And my postpartum photos, I should throw one up in here,
Yeah.
about 2 months apart. And they are so interesting because I've been mostly eating carnivore and then but never strictly. So
Yeah.
I always eat dinner with the family. We
Yeah.
generally eat meat and veggies and I've got two step boys, 13 and 15. So we throw like whatever it is, oven chips, like potatoes,
Yeah.
rice, pasta in for them because they're so active. And yeah, so just mostly meat and veggies and fruit when I felt like it because
Yeah.
gosh, you need it when you're pregnant and shortly afterwards. I find yeah, incredible for mental clarity, basically.
Oh,
Really good for the gut.
yeah.
Like, yeah, really, really good. And people are like, what about fiber? Do you still go to the toilet? Yes, you do, if anyone is wondering.
Spoiler.
But it's so funny they said because I would never try something without knowing the science behind it. And
Yeah.
so I did a deep dive into the fiber thing, and it's sort of the same compound, BHB, that they reckon fiber gives you is actually a ketone that you
Are you
get.
kidding?
Yeah, from doing very, very low fiber, sort of carnivore-based diet. It's
Wow.
fascinating. So that's why it also makes you feel good because BHB is chemically very similar to GHB, which I think is actually like a date rape drug, but it's a really potent drug and
Wow.
it really, really elevates your mood.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
fascinating stuff when you start to look into it.
Totally. Oh my
But
God.
yeah, that's so interesting. You say carnival meal because I think so
Yeah.
many people get really hung up on what they have to eat at every meal. They have to be really elaborate and lots of veggies. And same applies to children, right? So veggie compounds, they're often bitter. And that's to stop children back in the day, in caveman days, eating things that might have been poisonous. So it's
Yeah.
like, don't eat those. It's like they really don't like them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the plant's defense mechanism and things. So don't worry about your kids not eating veggies, guys. They'll be fine.
There's an evolutionary grounding to it.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
interesting. But
Wow.
yeah, so what are you eating on an average day at the moment, Sophia? Tell me more.
Great question. So, I mean, most of what I'm eating is whole foods.
Yeah.
So I mean, how I would start the day is either with a smoothie where I'm trying to prioritize different fats, proteins, leafy greens, um, the odd powder, greens, powders, etc.
Yeah.
Or like chia pudding, homemade granola, seasonal fruit, that kind of thing, nut butter alongside it. Then, oh my gosh, what do my lunches look like? I feel like it's very random. It can be leftover dinner. It can be like
Yeah.
gluten-free sourdough, avocado, smoked salmon, like those
Yeah.
Brussels sausages, scrambled eggs, like something like that. I typically try and have some kind of like whole food baking in our fridge. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, just making something. I try to do it on Sundays, and so it's just there for the week. So
Yeah.
typically around 3 o'clock, I'm like, oh, I could really go for something. So I used to do like dark chocolate and peanut butter, and I was like, man, I'm consuming so much dark chocolate in a day. I need to rein this in. So I do like just like kind of protein banana muffins or what's called a soul loaf that is from Gwangana, this beautiful retreat that I just went to in January. It was amazing. But it's like almond meal and apple and sultanas and I don't know, really just amazing things. It's so yum. And then yeah, dinner always some form of like veggies, meat, um, yeah, just random, but always whole foods. And then, yeah, I love going out for dinners and just indulging like once or twice a week and, making it more about connection and that sort of thing, rather than it being this like, oh, I'm only allowed like one treat meal, something just like I trust my
Yeah.
body and I know that what I'm putting into it for the most part is really
You
great.
know how it's going to make you feel and you know
Yeah.
your way back, if
Yeah,
that
yeah,
makes
no,
sense.
exactly, exactly. And I
Yeah,
think,
which makes the whole thing a lot more like you can be a lot more flexible, I
yes,
think, when you know.
definitely. I think that's so true. I think that's so true. And I mean, from my perspective, and I know your perspective too, I mean, health isn't about restriction. And
Yeah,
I really feel that. I feel like if somebody's like really, really restricting and it's like sucking the life out of them, that's not healthy, right? Like health looks more like balance and flexibility. And
definitely.
yeah, just being able to live a great life as a human, in this world.
I
And
should say on that note,
yeah.
my carnivore diet has always included wine.
Oh,
So
I love that.
it's definitely not a strict carnivore diet.
Yeah, yeah. But see, like you're a human. I mean, what else?
Yeah.
You've got it. People have their vices, people have their things, like for
Oh,
sure.
that's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. So, Sophia, before we
Yeah.
really, really bore people, I wonder if anyone's still listening. I hope they are. So I would love a few takeaways from
Sure.
you.
Oh my goodness. Takeaways. Um, get curious about what you're putting into your body, I think would be my first one. So by that I mean ingredient reading the food that you're putting into your body. If you don't recognize it, if you couldn't have it in your kitchen at home, it's probably ultra processed. So
Yeah.
being curious about that, that is probably well, that is definitely a big takeaway.
Another quote from you that's we've both repurposed and it's not ours.
Yes.
Don't eat anything your great grandmother wouldn't recognize.
Yes, I love that. That's Michael Pollan, right? Love
Yeah.
that quote. It's so true. I mean, that's only a couple of generations ago. That's really not that long ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, thinking about if my great grandmother wouldn't recognize it, should I be putting it into my body? Has my body evolved to be able to manage this? I mean, like tiny bits, being flexible, being a human in the world, etc. Sure, but every day, probably not. I think also, yeah, just recognizing that physical health is mental health. I think that like you can't pull them apart. None of our systems are working in isolation. They're all working together. And when the food that we're putting into it is either helping that process and the system work in the best way that it can, or it's hindering that process. So
Yeah.
yeah, just recognizing that the stuff we eat really will impact how we can show up in the world and our psychology, our mental health, all of that stuff. So just be curious for yourself about it. Don't just take our word for it. Like go out there and try it out.
Yeah, I love that. At the end of the day, life is one big experiment, right?
Yes.
But we
Yes.
only get one of them, and we only get one body, and we only get one mind,
Yes.
and we are the ones of in charge of what we do with it, what we make it think, how we move it, how we feed it. It's empowering, right? Like you say.
Absolutely right. It's empowering. That's it. Like we don't have to, I guess, outsource these decisions to other people. Like we can make them for ourselves. We can make a change today. Again, it doesn't have to be radical and like take you to that future you in one go, but it can just be like one small thing, like, even going to bed half an hour earlier or choosing a
Something
different.
better every day.
Yeah, exactly. One small thing. It'll all amount in the big stuff at the end of the day. Yay.
Exciting. Well, on that note, Sophia, please will you come back when you've finished your study so that we can
Yes.
find out more about it?
Absolutely. Yep. I would totally love to. For sure.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time today. We'll let these lovely people go and I'll chat to you soon.
Amazing. Thank you.